What's the scariest thing you've seen with your own eyes? Story 1. Waking up in the morning to my dad screaming my mom's name. I ran into their bedroom and tried to wake her up and felt she was cold. I still had my dad help me get her onto the ground so I could do CPR. I tried to get my dad to call 911, but he was frozen. So I grabbed the phone and talked to the 911 guy while doing CPR. I went to give breath to her and blood started leaking out of her mouth. I knew at that point she was dead, but I still did CPR until the firemen showed up and pronounced her DOA. The paramedics showed up and literally walked inside and back out the front door in like 2 minutes. Coroner and police came next. That whole day felt like a year. The family flew in from all over and helped us clean up and brought food, but the whole day was just a damn fever dream. The last 9 months have felt like years. Story 2. A close family member was hanging from an extension cord by her neck in the doorway to my basement. Found her as I went to do laundry. She was visiting during a period of emotional distress that she'd hidden well. That and seeing fear in my father's face for the first time when he was told his back pain was terminal cancer and that he'd be dead within 3 months. He adopted me, him and his wife, and was the strongest man I've ever known. It was shocking to see him scared. Poor mom lost my brother when he was 30 and dad when he was 50. She's so strong. Story 3. A car accident that should have ended me and my mother. A drunk driver took up both lanes of a country road, and my mother hugged the side of the road to try to let him pass, but we hit a massive pothole at about 60 miles per hour, sending the car tumbling into a nearby field. I vividly remember that we flipped 4.5 times, and that the second flip was the worst. My mom was knocked unconscious for about 5 minutes, and I was left in a car upside down in the middle of nowhere, thinking my mother was dead and I was trapped all alone. Worst moment of my life. We both made it out and received only minor injuries and some pretty serious concussions. Story 4. I'm a firefighter and had to assist in cutting down a woman who hanged herself from an overpass. I was on the tip of the ladder off the truck and was maneuvered under her to cut the rope and secure her body. After I cut her down, we decided the best option was to move the ladder to a horizontal position as close to the ground as possible in order to pass her off to the coroner. The only problem was that she started to sink through the rungs, so when the ladder was finally horizontal, someone had to crouch underneath her and push her body back through the rungs. From my perspective, I couldn't see the person underneath her, and for a brief second, my irrational brain thought she had come back to life and was climbing out of the ladder. I damn near crapped my pants. Story 5. I was 18 years old and following a friend home from a party. We all had been drinking, but he definitely shouldn't have been anywhere near a vehicle with home. Much he had. He got violent when we tried to take his keys. So at the behest of my girlfriend, we left the party early to follow him home. About 1.5 miles from his house, he sped up and drove right into a cliff face when he failed to hold a turn. We stopped, I got out, and I told my GF to drive my car to the nearest gas station and call for help. This was pre-cell phone. I walked up to the car, and he was basically cut in half inside the vehicle and pinned by the steering column. The entire interior looked like a blood bomb exploded inside it. He was still alive. I held his hand and told him his mom was on her way. I just kept telling him he'd be okay until he passed out. It was only a couple of minutes, but it felt like an hour. I went fetal as soon as he closed his eyes. First of 2 death rattles I've heard. I didn't stop crying for almost a week. I was a mess. So if you know someone who insists on driving drunk and wants to fight over it, fight over it. It's better to have a pissed off friend who never talks to you again than a dead one. Pin them down if you can. Almost 25 years later, and I'm still messed up over it. Story 6. Someone ran into a gigantic fire on purpose. Burning Man. 2017. My friends were gathered, along with about 50,000 other people, in a huge circle around the man, a 50-ish foot wooden man figure set within a large wooden pavilion that served as the central point in the festival's layout. It was the night of the man burn, when that structure was set ablaze with a fireworks show and ultimately a fire, as part of the ending ritual of the festival. The whole crowd was set back a few hundred yards from the fire, with two perimeters of security guards in between. We were watching the fire really pick up momentum, and all of a sudden a tall, athletic man standing about 10 yards from us started bolting towards the fire. He zigzagged around the security personnel, and at first, everyone thought he was just being an idiot and would turn back. But after he passed the innermost security and then kept running to the fire, I got a terrible sinking feeling. Even 100 yards out, the air must have been so incredibly hot that this person was surely burning. This was no stunt. Eventually, he ran right up to the fire and dove headfirst into it. There was a huge gasp in the crowd. Nobody could believe their eyes. I quickly gathered our friends in a huddle, and we just hugged. That was a nightmarish experience. Story 7. I had a girlfriend that I took to a water park. We had just climbed a stair about 4 stories up when she had a seizure. The stairs went straight down, with no turns or anything. She had a seizure and went unconscious. She was standing next to me on the stairs, and I caught a glimpse of her starting to fall from the corner of my eye. I reached out and grabbed her wrist just in time. But her weight, she was skinny, caused me to start to fall too. I reached out again to grab the stair rail and hung on for our dear lives. I managed to swing her around and set her on a step and held her there until she came back to it. She woke up and asked what happened to her, since she was sitting on the stair, and I was shaking like a leaf, and she was unimpressed about it and just turned back around. I was scared the rest of the day, and I hung on to her hand and wound not let go, especially on rides. She didn't understand why I was shaking so much the rest of the day. Story 8. Working what seemed like ground zero of a small standalone hospital, they couldn't call up satellite locations for supplies. When COVID just kicked off in February, there weren't enough N95s for everyone. Then we ran out of room in the morgue, which only had 3 slots for bodies. The hospital had to get a freezer. Think of what you see in restaurants to store the extra dead bodies. We ran out of gurneys, so dead patients were put into a body bag and put right on the ground. That still messed me up. Story 9. A dog dragging a 12-year-old in circles while she screamed the worst scream I've ever heard. I could not get to her before he did some serious damage to her arm, and some idiot yanked him off her instead of properly dealing with the attack, so he actually made her injuries way worse. It sounds insane, but if a dog has one of your limbs, you want to shove it further into their mouth. It forces them to let go. Pulling away will shred your flesh apart, guaranteed. Big mastiff. He was really off in the head, and I had told many people involved he wasn't trustworthy and needed a behavior assessment. Nobody listened, and now some poor kid probably has a phobia now, not to mention some nasty scarring. It just shouldn't have happened. I think about her to this day, hoping she's doing all right. The dog was, of course, humanely euthanized. Story 10. I'm a public school teacher. We had an active shooter in my school almost 10 years ago. Luckily, he only brought a pistol and only had a few students he wanted to go after instead of a mass shooting incident. The police were on the scene and in the school in a matter of minutes and really did stop the scenario from being worse than it was. I had my students locked in my room, door locked, with them on the wall next to the door. So if you looked in, you wouldn't see anyone. I am a yearbook teacher, so I inexplicably still had X-Acto knives in my room. I stood next to the door with one in my hand while blocking the view from the door to the students. I saw the shooter walk by, but he never looked in my door. Story 11. Last week I came back home from Russia, driving through Poland on the highway. Haven't slept in 36 hours, I think, but was taking turns driving with mom and brother. At some point, I saw 2 red lights high up in the air, kinda like eyes. I focused at it for just a second and suddenly saw a giant creature on two legs, glowing eyes walking through mountains. Looked away for a second and then again. What I saw was two towers, probably radio towers. The scary part was driving 140 kilometers per hour and suddenly hallucinating with my family in the car. I drove to the next rest stop and we switched drivers, but I didn't tell anyone. Story 12 was dating a girl that had a Pitbull terrier. Her 8-year-old son came to visit. Me and the 8-year-old kid were playing with the dog. Out of nowhere, the dog attacked him and ripped his arm up. I pulled that kid off with his skin flapping and blood everywhere. I put that dog in the bathroom and wrapped up his arm and rushed him to the hospital with his mom. Just thinking about that moment in my life is a nightmare. I am against people owning pit bulls after that. I'm sure some ignorant person on here is going to downvote me and tell me that I'm a horrible person for not rescuing. But this is partly why I'm kind of hesitant to rescue dog. I've grown up with purebred dogs and had them from birth. Every single dog my family has gotten that was a rescue or taken in at an older age had strange issues. All but one attacked people. This is more of a nuisance when it's a small dog, but a large dog. That's a big risk to take when you don't know what might trigger it. Story 13, Pitbull attack. I used to be much more open-minded about bully breeds until I witnessed what they're capable of. Even if there are a lot of them that are great dogs, the fact that the worst people always end up wanting one kind of dog puts a damper on it. I think you should need a license to own one and get jail time. If they attack either a person or a dog, even if the damage isn't that great, I love dogs, so I'd never want them to be put down, but the breed should be bred out, except for perhaps scientific purposes or the military or something. Make them prohibitively expensive with mandatory insurance. Homeless folks or folks in the ghetto shouldn't be anywhere near them, and it should be prosecuted. I know a lady who bought her kids a cane corso cause WTF not. Obviously they were not good caretakers, and the dog ended up causing a lot of damage. They had the dog less than 6 months and had it put down because they didn't want it anymore. Story 14, shallow water blackout while freedive spearfishing. 10 plus years ago, I was much less experienced and I was freediving with my much more experienced mentor to shoot groupers. He had surfaced and taken his first breath, so I thought everything was a-okay, and I grabbed his fish to help him brain it. Next thing I knew, he was slipping beneath the surface, unconscious. It took me far too long to register what was happening, and by that time, he had sunk about 15 feet. I wasn't ready to dive yet, but I took a deep breath and chased after him and caught up around 30 feet. I swam him up to around 10 feet before my diaphragm convulsions started to make me panic and I darted for the surface. Luckily, our other friends had made it over by then and completed the rescue while I composed myself. Seeing my unconscious friend sinking into 70 feet deep, murky water was pretty haunting. Nowadays, freedive courses are readily available in most regions which teach standardized procedures for when your partner surfaces and how to do rescues. But that stuff was rarer, hard to find, are expensive to book back then. Story 15. A car with 4 teenagers careening by me in traffic at 100 plus miles per hour, windows down, music blaring. Then a minute later, passing the same car that had gone off the road into a cement pillar overpass support in flames. I pulled over, so did another car, to see if there's anything we could do. There wasn't. By the time I got near, the flames were so hot and so high I couldn't get close to the car. Nobody got out. 4 kids went from just having fun listening to music with my friends to being dead in minutes. I saw them at the peak and at the end. This was almost 30 years ago now, and the sounds and smells and sights are still there when I think about it. Story 16. I was on the promenade in Nice when the terrorist attack happened in 2016. We were there on a family holiday, and my mom requested we cross over to the other side of the road due to the wind chill. It was a warm, vibey night, and a lot of families were out strolling after having seen the fireworks. A couple of minutes later, this truck ran over a large group of people and families, and then there were loud, ear-piercing bangs. It took me some time to get over that incident, the scale of tragedy and suddenness of it. I used to love watching The Dark Knight as a movie, but the scene with the large tanker lorry had such a vivid sound that it always triggered something in me. That sound of a large truck. Lorry racing used to trigger something in me. Thankfully, it's subsided in the last couple of years. Story 17. I was on a first date, walking from a park to get ice cream. A couple was riding their bikes across the crosswalk to the other side of the street when the woman lost control of her bike and hit the curb. She flew across the sidewalk, body first into a storefront with a single pane glass front where she got stuck halfway. She was a heavy-set woman. Half her body and one arm were stuck inside the store, and she was alive and trying to pull herself out. It happened right in front of us, and the boyfriend was in shock and didn't move. I helped her out of the window and realized her triceps was mostly completely detached, and because she was heavy, the size of the detached area was about the size of a Pomeranian dog. My date was able to get bandages and towels from the store, and I just sort of tried to hold up the missing piece and wrap the bandage around it to hold it in place, and we called 911. I'll never forget the look on her boyfriend's face. Scariest look of fear I've ever seen. Total paralysis. She survived luckily. Story 18. Back in 2018, I was working as a field electrician doing new builds. This job was an existing building shell with high voltage lines coming in, so we needed to convert it to a lower voltage for the suite. This entails hanging a half-ton transformer from the ceiling and wiring it in the air. We used a chain hoist and a single-point eye bolt to hoist the transformer up. Very sketchy, but not the scary part. Someone within our company wired the line side of the wires to the mains before we had the load side connected to the transformer. Their reasoning was since there's a breaker switch controlling the power feed, there's no real danger. Cue my partner, sitting halfway inside the transformer, on top of a 16-foot ladder to wire up the load. At some point, they begin testing power feed and ultimately flip on the main power, sending high voltage into the transformer my partner was inside. The lights in the entire building dimmed and flickered, and a freakish blue glow illuminated the ceiling. The scream coming from the arcing electricity could be heard from 2 suites away. It was only powered for approximately 5 seconds, but managed to melt holes through the transformer's enclosure, the flexi tube we used to encase the wire, and a portion of the bus bar. My partner was still inside the transformer when it was all said and done. In those first moments, I wasn't sure if I was looking at a living man or a dead body. Fortunately, and by some grace, he was entirely unharmed. Story 19. My family and I, including 2 younger siblings, went to my uncle's house to cook out and have a small party. His girlfriend was there and things were great until we decided it was time to go. Girlfriend was nervous and asked for a ride home. Uncle heard that and got mad, grabbing her purse and shoes and saying she could leave without them. The whole thing was strange to me, as I was around 12 or 14 and had a delayed understanding of what was going on. Next thing I know, I walk into the kitchen to see my uncle twisting his girlfriend's purse strap around her neck, trying to strangle her. My mom and his son get him off of her. His mom comes over to calm him down. We and the girlfriend make our escape while he's kneeing his own mom in the face, with his son literally on his back choking him. Haven't seen or talked to him since. Never knew he was like that when drunk. It was a total shock. He was always fun to hang out with before that. Story 20. Watching my dad lose control of his motorcycle on a turn, dropping the bike which caused the tail end to fly over the handlebars, sending him flying through the air upside down to then land on his head-shoulder area just off the road. Talk about time slowing down. I can very vividly remember the image of him 5 feet in the air upside down. He was face down, totally motionless, and didn't seem to be breathing when I got him. He came to and was off in an ambulance before long, broke his clavicle, cracked his scapula, and broke 3 ribs on the back, but made a full recovery. My mom still won't let him get another bike. Story 21. I was at a crowded beach one summer. There was a group of kids playing ball in the water. Everything was normal. Suddenly there were screams as one kid was nowhere to be seen. Turns out he collapsed due to intense sun and heat and went underwater. Rescue guards were at the scene in seconds. They pulled the boy out of the water and tried to reanimate him. Also, an ambulance arrived shortly after. At some point, they put a blanket over the boy, and that was it. Later, I heard he belonged to a tourist family, and the parents were not at the scene as it happened. The whole thing felt scary. Story 22. I live rural on a large lake. Every winter, wolves cross the lake to hunt. Then, before the spring comes, they head back southwest. I've told this story on here before, but anyways, one year we had an early thaw, and one wolf didn't make it back across. He was with us for the summer. I ran into him a few times, but the first couple were scary as crap. Not that the other times weren't scary, he just kind of walked past me. In the middle of the night, while I was walking home, we were heading in opposite directions on a dirt road. I thought it was a dog at first, but he was massive, at least 100 pounds. Bright eyes in the moonlight when he looked at me. I don't know what it was, probably nerves, but I said yo to it, and we both just kept walking our own ways. We do contracts for the Ministry of Natural Resources and confirmed it was a male wolf via trail cam. Females don't get that big. I think the only thing that kept people safe was basically the year of the rabbit. The rabbit population exploded that year. You could barely walk 20 feet without seeing one. He probably ate very well. Every time I'd walk at night, after the initial encounter, I felt like I was being watched, always keeping a combat knife on my belt and a walking stick with me in case he'd changed his mind about eating me. Living in the countryside is fun. I've encountered bears, but they were as scared of me as I was of them. I basically have a pet fox. She's awesome. She even showed me her kits last year. Her boyfriend is kind of a prick, though.